Hello testers and welcome to another STP community webinar. My name is James and I'm the event coordinator here at STP. Today we're joined by Joel Montbelitsky from Practitest, and he will be talking about modern testing and why we should focus more on quality and less on testing. A few things to cover before we get started today. A reminder, we have our next webinar on December 9th from Julia Pottinger at Quality Works Consulting Group. And the topic is Agile QA Toolkit, where she will discuss her experience as a QA consultant and the various testing tools and concepts she applied, as well as other useful QA tips. Visit softwaretestpro.com to register for the webinar and view all of the upcoming webinars from STP in 2020. Looking to practice your speaking and presentation skills or have an idea for a webinar topic? Webinars are great for both new and veteran speakers, and STP is looking to fill the rest of the 2020 community webinar schedule. So submit your webinar proposal today at softwaretestpro.com. If you're on social media and talking about this webinar, be sure to tag us at SoftwareTestPro and use the hashtag STPWebinar. Also, give Joel a follow while you're at it, at Joel Monte. So let's go ahead and get started with today's presentation, but first here's a quick introduction on Joel. Joel is a co-founder and chief solution architect at Practitest and has been in testing and QA since 1997. He has worked as a tester, QA manager, and director, and a consultant for many companies in Israel, the US, and the European Union. Joel is a blogger with a QA intelligence blog and is constantly imparting webinars on several testing and quality related topics. And on that, let's go ahead and bring in Joel today for his presentation.
Thank you. And I'm also sharing my camera because I feel that it makes it a little bit less, a little bit more personal. So if you don't want to see me, no worries. You can just close it. But James, thank you for the intro, and thanks for STP for having me here. It's always a pleasure to speak to other people in the community. And let's get started. Wait, let's see if the presentation works. Yay, here it goes. Okay, so even though James did speak a little bit about me, so I'm just gonna fill in some of the blanks. Well, yeah, tester. I like to call myself a accidental tester. I guess as many of us, I got into testing by accident, given that I was in college and someone asked me if I wanted to do testing, and I really didn't know what testing was all about, but I was between bartending and this new thing that they just offered me, and this thing had a chair and paid about $2 more an hour, so I went into testing. And long story short, I'm here. This is me. I used to, in practice, one of the cool things that I do is that I get to interact with our customers. Let me just close this. We very much believe that we need to learn from all of our users in order to make a better system. And so I used to fly quite a lot. Actually, this is my last picture on a plane. As you can see, it was around March, and you can see not because of the snow outside, but because of what I'm wearing. And I'm also part of a number of other very cool projects, including, well, a podcast that I have with my friend Rob Lambert, and the state of testing survey and report that I do with my friend Lalit Kumar, and the online test conf that is a pretty cool conference, next one actually in December. As Jane said, I'm also co-founder and architect at Practitest. Without going into too much details, if you're looking for a pretty cool QA management solution that interacts with everything, literally almost everything, and the whole idea is to do something that is more streamlined and more about the stuff that I'm going to be speaking in the next hour. So go ahead and check it out. And don't worry, you won't be alone. We have quite a lot of pretty nice users who are constantly giving us feedback, and hopefully will give me another reason to continue flying and visiting everyone in the coming years. Just go to our site, www.practice.com, and there's a link. You can start a free evaluation and get started. But enough plugging. Let's actually start with what we come here. And I'm going to be asking you quite openly to stop focusing on testing. Meaning you're too focused on testing. You're basically, I'm guessing, solely focused on testing or mostly focused on testing. And that is actually something that it's problematic, to say the least, I guess. And I want to explore with you about this today. So I want to start, first of all, I want to start asking you a question, okay? And the idea of asking this question is basically to try to frame what we're going to be working on today. And the question that I'm going to ask you, it's not a simple one, though. I want you to think, what value do you provide to your company? And by value, I don't mean something abstract. I'm going to go into the greedy side, meaning how much are you generating your company? How much are you helping your company to generate more? Now, I know this is not a simple question. We're not asked about that. Most people who get asked in testing, meaning what value do we provide, we say, well, we don't really provide value. We're a cost center. Maybe we're enabling stuff. No, I want you to think about that a little bit further. So let me help you. Try to think, what decisions do you help to make? Okay. Try to think if there's anything that you change in the way your company is delivering products. Are you helping them change for the better? And most importantly, if you were not there, not John or Jane or Linda, you're not there. I'm saying your function is not there. They would say, hey, we don't need a fill in the blank here anymore. What would be different in your company? Okay. And if you want to write down those questions, those answers actually, not those questions. And I promise we'll get back to that in about 20, 30 minutes from now. Okay. Promise. You can hold me to my promise. But enough about that. I want to talk about testing. And one of the things that I do, meaning, obviously we cannot do testing all day long. And one of the things, my hobbies is started by listening to all sorts of podcasts and stuff like that and stuff you should know. And then I got into podcasts about history. Yeah. I also listen to podcasts about testing. It will be obvious in a couple of minutes. But I also listen to podcasts and books about history. And one of the things that I realized is that the world is in a constant state of evolution. And yeah, it sounds trivial, but no, everything evolves. And one of the things that it's cool when you get into history is that there's no such a thing as a revolution. Things don't happen spontaneously and quickly. Things build up over time and continue changing over time, and you see the process. Even all the quote-unquote revolutions, they're actually evolutions. Maybe accelerated, but you can see how they happen. Anything that actually changes too fast goes back to the way it was before. You need to have a pace on that. Now, when we look into software development and more specifically software testing, our evolution looks like this. So at least when I started, we used to have the waterfall model, and we started working more and more with the V model. And then we started listening about a weird animal called iterative or extreme programming back then. Then we started listening more about Agile and Scrum, stuff like that. And today we very much hear quite a lot about DevOps and Agile and stuff like that. What I want us to do right now, I want us to examine this evolution from the lens of the tester. Okay, how has this been affecting testers? And I want to start from the waterfall and the V-models. And again, the reason I might have started before, but this is what I experienced, this is what I lived. And this session is a lot about what I lived and experienced. So if I look from the testing perspective on the V or waterfall models, our reality was dictated by these points. Requirements were ready and complete. Whenever we started a project, it used to be either a very large document, or even sometimes they printed out some specs and you had the word spec specifications. It used to be a big book, and everything was supposed to be written in there. There were requirement engineers, people who their job was basically to come up with those requirements. So we didn't influence those at all. Development and testing, we're working completely separate. I remember when I started in one of my companies, we were in 2 separate buildings even. And we met whenever there was like a joint session, but we didn't even eat lunch together or anything like that. We didn't interact. The work was based or is based on cycles, and these cycles converge over into the release. So you might have some functional cycles, and then you have regression cycles, and then you have hardening cycles, and then you have sanity cycles, and then you release it. A big release meaning something that takes a lot of time. We used to work on a small release for the companies I used to work with, might have been 4 months, 3 months. It was like a tiny release. Regular release, 12 months to 18 months, and I worked on releases of 2 years, 24 months. Okay, so that's how big it worked. Something very important, products were shipped to someone else. Meaning, I remember we used to finish one of our projects, we physically signed those CD-ROMs or diskettes. They were sent into production, and it took about 2 weeks until the first customers got him, and then about a month and a half until we started getting feedback from support. And that feedback, as it's written here, came from 3rd or 4th sources. It was never direct. It was always from customers via support, via someone else, and all the way to us. Now, if we look back then, I'm talking here late 90s, on the objective of the tester, our charter was to find all the bugs before releasing the product, and making sure that after we found all of them, we choose which ones we want to fix and ensure that the product reach a level of stability. Now, funny thing here is that we really were thought to be finding all the bugs, so much so that whenever a bug was found by a customer in production, escaping defect, we were the ones to blame. And this is not in theory, meaning I have 2 bleeding ulcers from the stress from working on bugs that were released on those products. And no one ever pointed a finger at anyone else other than their testers, because this is what we were paid for, only finding the bugs. No one cared about anything else. Now, let's move over a little bit and let's start talking about iterative models. And the most common one that we all know today, it's Agile or Kanban, but actually it's the Agile models, but they didn't start on the 2010s, they started on the 2000s, and it started with XP and most iterative models. And it's important to understand it was not because developers were bored, it was because marketing said we cannot live with releases every 3 months or every 6 months or every year. You need to be able to give us deliveries faster and faster all the time. So we looked into a way, how can we break those large monumental releases into smaller things? And so we got into Agile. Moving forward, so the way that this changed us, and again, it might be the developer, but developers and testers, was that we started working together. And it was a very refreshing change because, yes, we did it informally. In many organizations, it's maybe a little bit more formally, but now we were working in one group. And it was frustrating for some of us QA directors or VPs, because they told us, hey, if up to now you had a group of 40 people, 40 testers under your wing, now we're going to spread that out into all the development teams, and you're going to be a dotted line manager of that, but that's another story for that. Now, if we talk that in Waterfall, those requirements were said and done. Now we're talking about user stories that we should be elaborating as we work with that. We were told that development should take a more active role in testing, because it was hard to achieve and people didn't know really how to do it. And we were working on very, very short sprints. From someone who thought that it takes 3 months, the shortest to release something, it looked quite silly to someone to tell me that, yes, you're going to be releasing in 3 weeks. Right now, I'm working on a company that we have continuous delivery. So we release 3, 5, 7 times a day. But again, we didn't even grasp how to do that. But still, products were being shipped to someone else because we were working on software that was to be installed on someone else's equipment, computer, servers, whatever. And so that feedback still came from third or fourth sources. Now, something happened along the way. Oh, sorry, our objective did change, and now we're supposed to work with development in order to release products quickly. And yes, we're working about shared stability and getting feedback from the field. So our charters were modified, and were modified for the good. Now, I'm not insinuating that if you're working Waterfall, you're working in an old way, and if you're working Agile, you're working in a new and cool way. No, personally, in my working practice, I get to meet a lot of customers and companies, and they're very professional teams working Waterfall today and doing a pretty good job at it. It really depends on the type of product and the type of culture of the company. So I'm not passing grades on this. I'm just saying how it actually evolved. Now, how did we get to DevOps? This is an important point to notice. As I mentioned about evolution, usually it's a convergence of factors. So in this case, we had that Agile methodology that we were about to release every 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 weeks, doesn't really matter. And what happened was about the same time we started getting the internet. And it sounds silly that you say that, but yes, meaning the internet became something that it's not only for emails. It started to become a platform and started with some e-commerce site on the early 2000s. And then everything at Salesforce.com was like, wow, meaning we're going to have a full system on the internet. And now it's simple and trivial that everything's on the internet, but it wasn't like that. Now, what happened here was that on the one hand, and again, we released it, so it was funny to see it, we were releasing every 3 weeks or so. And we were basically shipping it over to another team called the operations teams, who were in charge, or IT, you know how you call it, who were working those servers. And at the beginning, it might not even have been on Amazon. You might have had a rack of servers connected directly to a backbone of the internet. And so we were shipping it to them. And it was taking them literally a week or 2 weeks just to install the software because it was very, very hard to install and configure. And so they started telling us, those development guys, those operations guys, hey, can you make it easier and faster for us to deploy it? And so that said that the people in the development side needed to learn more how the operations side actually worked. So we became a little bit more of an operations type of guys. And then what happened was that these guys over here realized that it might have been faster for them just to fix some of the small bugs that were found in there instead of asking development to fix it. So the guys in operations became a little bit more developerish on their ways until with time, the two groups fused together. And so many organizations today adopted what is called DevOps. Now, DevOps means that development and operations are together. Why am I saying this? Because you still meet quite a lot of organizations that they tell you, hey, we have our development teams in here and they're doing the development, and we have a DevOps team in here that is doing DevOps, but basically they still work on the level where they have development and operations, so they're not really working DevOps or kind of DevOps-y. But DevOps means that, yes, your developers are actually in operations, and it's very, very important because when you work on DevOps, really DevOps, as you will see, we get a number of different game changers in here. So let's go over those. Now, just to make sure that we're on the same page, DevOps means that we start from a very straightforward Agile or iterative plan where we are doing the planning, the coding, building, and testing. But then instead of shipping, we are going to be the same people who are in charge of the release operation. We are in charge of releasing and deploying. Then we're operating constantly, and as a side effect of the operation, then we're monitoring and getting as much information as we can or as we want from that. And if we're smart enough, then we're going to be using that information in order to feed the planning, coding, and building. So it becomes a self-feeding loop in here. Okay, and this is extremely important. And the problem is that not a lot of people realize this, because if we look into DevOps, then for many people at the beginning, it feels a lot like Agile and they don't see the difference. But because we're in charge of deploying and running our products, then we don't need to ask for others in order to give us feedback, okay? This is important, and I want you to think about it. If we said that we are going to be releasing let's say, an improvement on our software in order to make sure that people like us more, we don't need to wait for our sales team to say the sales is going up or our customer success team to tell us that people are happy. We can measure if people are using the system more. We can see if there are more downloads, if there are more clicks, if people are using the functionality that we just delivered, okay? So we don't need to wait for anyone else. And the same goes with bugs. If you have a problem in your software, then you will see it reflected on measurements in the product. If it's, okay, so I released the bug, so I have a number of exceptions coming up, I can see them directly. I don't need to wait even for customers to tell me. And if for some reason you see that usage in one part of the product is decreasing, then that might go into a bug in there. So we can actually measure that directly. Now, that also means that the cost of releasing a bug goes down radically. If you remember that graph that says if you find the bug on design, it costs that, and if it's on development, it's that, and if it's on testing, it's that, and if it's on production, it's like this. Well, not anymore, because sometimes it's so hard to simulate production environments in testing that for some bugs, not for all, it's better just to, if they were to happen, to materialize, let it materialize in productions and we'll handle that. Now we're talking about smaller bugs. We're talking here about data loss, where we don't want to have something that it's health system that is going to be causing deaths of people. No, but we're talking about most of those bugs. It's easier to just fix them in production. So a lot of things have changed if we move to DevOps. And if we look into the objective of most testing teams, when you work in DevOps, you want to release as quickly as possible. You want to enable stability. You want to make sure that everything is stable enough, but not only on the product, also on the deployment process, because we're in charge of deploying as well. And we also want to get fast feedback from production, because we will use that feedback as that loop that goes into whatever we want to develop next. Now, I might put a final point in here, final period, and move on, but evolution hasn't stopped that way. And as I mentioned, I not only listen to blogs about history, I also listen to quite a lot of blogs on testing. There's some pretty cool blogs out there if you want to send in, send you, not necessarily mine. But evolution started on Waterfall and V-model, and then we went over to Agile, and then we went over to DevOps. I think that today we are on a place where there are other models, mostly around, let's say, testing or quality. And there's not one. I think that there's about 2 or 3 that I have identified one way or another, but the one that I like the most is one that's called modern testing. And modern testing, not in testing the modern times, no, modern testing as modern testing principles. And hopefully you've heard about it, but if not, let me introduce it very, very quickly. So modern testing is not something that I made up at all. I didn't come up with that. I may be part of that community, but again, a lot of people are. Modern testing is the brainchild of 2 people, 2 pretty cool testers that I appreciate quite a lot. One of them, Alan Page, the other one, Brent Jensen. Both of them used to work on Microsoft. Alan is not at Microsoft anymore. He's the guy on the left. He's right now on Unity. And Brent is still at Microsoft, but he's not a tester anymore. He's a data scientist. And they have a testing podcast called AD Testing. Pretty cool. I really, really recommend it. As part of their podcast, they started talking about their philosophy on testing and what is the responsibility of testing. And they realized that it has been modified, and they came up with modern testing. And you can go to moderntesting.org, or I recommend you go to moderntesting.org. And if you go to moderntesting.org, you will get to this page where they have, first of all, the mission statement and then the principles. And the mission statement is basically saying what is modern testing about. And strangely enough, this is the mission statement of modern testing. Modern testing is here in order to accelerate the achievement of shippable quality. When I read it the first time, I was like, okay, and how do I eat that? I mean, I can agree with all the words in there, but I don't really know how to make that a reality. So they helped us a little bit, and they come up with the modern testing principles, which basically say what does modern testing believe in, so that we know if we want to follow them or not. And I'm going to go over them very quickly. That's important. Now, this is not a modern testing talk. I don't feel qualified enough to do it, and I don't intend to do it. If something, I want you to go ahead and read about it and learn about it. But to go over this very briefly, modern testing believes in the following. First of all, our priority as modern testing is to improve the business. We're not here to improve the quality. We're here to improve the bottom line of the business. We're here, if you're an non-profit organization, to make more money, not for profit, to serve your whoever customers are. What we do is we accelerate the team using models like lean thinking and theory of constraints. That's a little bit less important in my mind, in order to identify, prioritize, and mitigate bottlenecks from the system. We're here basically to make the system better, to make the process better by eliminating those bottlenecks, because we want to improve the system by working faster. We are a force of continuous improvement. It's not a one-time deal. We're here for the long run, and we're helping the team to adapt and optimize in order to succeed, rather than providing a safety net to catch failure. So we're saying, hey, our job is not to find your bugs. Our job is to help you to continuously improve. And that's a very, very big statement, because we're basically shifting, not sharing responsibility on bugs, we're shifting responsibility on bugs or on quality as a whole. We care deeply about the quality culture of the team. We are part of the quality culture of the team, but the way that we do it is by coaching, leading, and nurturing the team towards a better quality culture. So we're here in order to be more educators than doers, in a sense. We're almost done, don't we? Principle 5, we believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of the product. We might think that we are improving the quality of the product, but judgment will come only from how the customer actually adopts that or provide us feedback on that. And I go back to that feedback that we can actually measure. We use data extensively to deeply understand customer usage, what I just mentioned before, and close the gaps between product hypothesis and business impact. And this is an important part. What does close the gap between product hypothesis and business impact? Meaning, when we're thinking an organization of releasing a new feature, it needs to be because it will help increase the bottom line of the company. So we have a hypothesis that by providing that feature, we will improve that bottom line in X or Y, however you want to measure. The use of extensive data is actually to prove that right or wrong. Okay, that's what we're here to do. And finally, we expanded testing abilities and knowledge of across the team, understanding this may reduce or even eliminate the need for a dedicated testing specialist. So we're here in order to teach people how to test, even if we understand that that might leave us out of a testing job in that team. Now, that doesn't mean that it's going to get you out of the job. It means that your job will be defined differently. Now, if you read this before, if you're working based on this, you're going like, yeah, it makes perfect sense. But for me, the first time that I read these principles, I had a weird feeling in my tummy because each one of them felt right, but I didn't know, meaning I was not doing most of them and I didn't know how to get there. And it felt like, well, in theory, these guys are right, but meaning it's theoretical. It's impossible to get there. We're too busy with our day-to-day jobs in order to actually start doing all this theoretical stuff. It's like saying, yes, developers are going to test. Yeah, like tomorrow they're going to grow wings and start flying. And so I didn't know how to catch this. It took me a while, and I will get into how did I actually caught this. And what helped me realize this was when I started thinking about this and talking to other people in the industry, and I realized that accelerating the achievement of shippable quality basically means that we need to do a mind shift. Instead of focusing on testing, we need to focus on quality assurance or quality engineering, okay? And it's kind of those stop doing the urgent in order to take care of the important. And that's when I realized that it was right. I mean, it was the actual way to work, but it will be quite a lot of work, okay? So all of this is good and fine, but meaning, what does it mean to us? What does it mean to you, to me, to everyone else tomorrow, okay? At first, I didn't know what to do with that, okay? And I didn't know how I can take this and adopt it, make it my own, maybe, implement it in practice, stuff like that, or talk about it with customers in a more concrete way. And one of the things that I did, I actually sat down and started thinking about it and broke my head and talked to a number of people. And if you know me, if you've been in any of my previous presentations, you know that I like to plan quite a lot. I'm kind of speak on that. And so what I did is I came up with something like this. And this was, actually it's a work in progress. I didn't come up with that. I came up with something that is quite simpler than that. It had a lot less branches and a lot less leaves, but it was my master plan on how can I start improving by focusing on quality, and how can I get rid of focusing so much on testing in order to focus on quality. And what I want to do on the second part of the presentation is to take you over these points that are the points that are guiding me. And as I mentioned, this is work in progress, and I'm constantly modifying this, but I will take you where I am today. And I do want to explain that this is my mind map, meaning this is what works for me, and I can change this all the time. And if you're going to take this, don't take it literally, but take it as ideas of stuff that you might want to start deploying or working based on your organization, on your skills, on whatever that fits for you. But you will not be able to apply this literally, and I do not intend you to apply this literally. Okay, so let's start going over the different branches so that you get a better idea of what we're talking about here. So I try to look at it from a project perspective. Okay, how do we start? Well, the project starts with user stories. So I think that one of the most valuable things that we can do is we can start validating user stories, because it's true that if you find issues on the user story instead of finding it on the development or the testing, you will have wasted a lot less time of programmers or testers or everyone else in order to do it. So the cost still goes up as the process continues. And the points where I try to focus the efforts of my team, and maybe now it's a good time to explain that even though I'm QA manager, I don't have testers that report to me. Actually, my company is very weird in the sense that we are a company development and test management platform, but we don't have dedicated testers in our teams. Our testing is being done by our developers, are being done by our support engineers, by our customer success engineers. We believe that everyone should be involved very firmly on the testing aspects of our product, And so we make sure that everyone's a tester. We also have people from marketing being testers and people from sales being testers. And it's great because it gets everyone on the testing mindset. And for a testing company, this is a very, very important thing. So one of the things that I make sure is that we have what is called user story validation here. So one of the things that we do because we work on an Agile, on a DevOps company, whenever we have a new idea, we don't release a full product outside. We release what is called an MVP, a minimal viable product. That is the smaller piece of functionality that will help us to validate whether we're on the right path. And the idea is that you float it, you put it to customers, and you see if they like it or not. No one will like it 100%, but they will say, yeah, it's cool, but, and they start giving you feedback, or you start seeing that people don't really use it, and so you drop it. The problem here is that it's very, very hard to generate an MVP, because either some people will say, no, you don't need everything in here, you need everything in here, and so you have a feature that is so small that no one actually sees value in that, or you start doing scope creep, and you have a feature that it takes you 4 sprints to release, and it's definitely not an MVP. So we work very hard to make sure that we do have those MVPs. One of the most important things is if you think you have an MVP, you will want to measure it. Even if it's not an MVP, even if it's a feature, as I mentioned, the whole idea is that we are releasing functionality or even improvements in order to increase our bottom line. So we need to have a measurable criteria of how do we know if the feature is successful or not. Are we going to be doing it? I mean, is the feature about response time? So let's measure response time. Let's see that response time on the system is quicker. If we're improving a part of the functionality, let's make sure that more people are using that. So let's have a success criteria on that. If sometimes, by the way, success criteria might be downloads on your mobile app provider or even dollars that you're going to be counting. But make sure that you do have a success criteria that is clearly defined. And then point number 3, make sure that you have instrumentation for that. Because even if you define the criteria, that doesn't mean that it will be easy for you to monitor and to measure if you're there or not. So as part of the user story validation is to make sure that all of those points are covered correctly. We also make sure to detect conflicts and inconsistencies, especially if your product starts growing. We have been developing practice for over 10 years, so we have quite a lot of functionality. Sometimes you start working on something that the people working on that completely forget that we have another piece of the product that might either be in conflict or be overlapping with that. And that doesn't mean we don't want to develop that, but we want to take that into account to make sure that there's some cohesiveness and synergies between that. So it's important to have that. Usability and accessibility. It's extremely expensive and close to impossible to inject accessibility later on. Yes, you can do it, but it will cost quite a lot more than if you look at accessibility from the UX perspective. And obviously usability too. So a lot of that, not only making sure that your links have legends and everything is not only color coded, stuff like that, it's also about UX. How do you reach that? How do you do that? And we put quite a lot of efforts. And also we capture a lot of inputs from other departments. It's incredible how you start working on a feature, sometimes you release it, and once you release it, someone from support comes and says, oh, but you didn't take into account that that customer has a lot of experience and that he could have given you quite a lot of feedback on that, and you missed that. Or, oh, this was extremely important for a customer, but not now, you should have done it later. So we try to capture as much input as we can from other teams, okay? And that helps us to make better use of our time and actually measure what we're doing correctly. Now, another aspect altogether, and I've been talking here quite a lot, if we say that the customer is the only one who's able to validate what we're doing to qualify it's good enough, that doesn't mean that we wait until the end to bring those inputs from the customer. Now, on the other hand, if you work for a normal company, let's say not a boutique company, and you don't have 10 users or 50 users, you have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of users, it's impossible to bring all the customers into the process, but you still have shortcuts for that. First of all, in the same way that everyone in my company basically takes part on the testing efforts, almost everyone takes part on support calls as well. Almost everyone has some support shifts a month to make sure that they're still connected to customers, how they work. Whenever possible, we bring people from development as well, from marketing into talks with customers to get feedback, even sales calls sometimes, or service calls, we do that as well. We work a lot with personas. I find that they help us to bring more concrete feedback or more concrete validation into the way that we develop products. Even how do we validate what's a showstopper or not, or what needs to be fixed right now or not, because we validate it to a persona. And because these people, my team, has been interacting with customers, many times a persona actually has the name of one of our, let's say, key customers. And so we can talk about Jane or Karen or Will, and we will even say the name of the company, and that brings quite a lot of weight into the persona, because it's easier for everyone to imagine how that person uses the system. And whenever possible, we'll try to bring data into the development process. And many times it's customers who agree to give us access to the way that their databases for testing, as long as we anonymize them or stuff like that. And a lot of your customers will too, if you ask them nicely and explain why you're doing that. And you know how it is. I mean, most of those bugs are going to be based on the data that you have. And so it's going to be very, very important to have it in there as well. And I will talk about this in a couple of minutes when I talk about environments as well. Okay, so after bringing customers into the process, then there's still the part on you will have people doing testing that up to now, they haven't been doing testing that much. So I don't expect them to start growing testing wings and testing glasses and testing hands in order to test better. We do quite a lot of training and coaching. I personally do, and other people who are more experienced in testers, some people who were testers in the past, we do quite a lot of training and coaching as well. So first of all, whenever we have a new person on the team, a developer obviously, but also if we have a new support engineer or someone like that, we have test training modules, meaning how do you plan testing, how do you run testing, how do you report bugs, what's exploratory testing, different approaches, different heuristics. We cover all of those points. We want people to understand it, even from a theoretical perspective. Now, we have a very defined process for testing. It's not a very heavy process for testing. I will talk about that in a second as well. But everyone knows what testing means in the company. Now, in my experience, the most maybe easier, maybe effective way of teaching people how to test is by doing pair testing sessions. I find that it's like teaching someone how to drive. You start by driving next to them and pointing at all parts of different aspects, but very quickly in the process, you will just let that person sit and start driving himself or herself. And as much as you can, as that coach, you will keep quiet and take notes and let that person experiment by themselves and learn by fooling around or playing around and giving quite a lot of feedback. Okay, but we do sometimes it's 2 pair testing sessions, sometimes it's 5, but it brings confidence and process and testing experience into those people who are not familiar with testing. And remember, you're asking someone who has been doing programming for the last 10 years to start thinking as a tester, he or she will be able to do it. And if they want to, they're not dumb, they will be able to do it, but you need to change their scope, you need to change their approach, and the best way is by doing it like this. Now, I didn't understand how important briefings and debriefings were until we did it more religiously. And if I needed to choose between briefings and debriefings, I would go for debriefings, but let me explain that a little bit. So the process is simple. Before you start testing, anyone who starts testing, they will do a briefing about it. They will take the programmer in charge of that. And if it's more complex, they will bring more people and they will say, okay, so this is what I'm going to be testing. This is what I think might be fishy here. And many times during the briefings, you see the programmer going like, oh, yeah, wait a second, I'll need to fix a couple of things, because even by briefing what you're going to be testing, you realize that there's some bugs that you're going to be catching before you just press the first click on the mouse. More important than that, after the testing has been done, then we have the briefings, and those debriefings usually bring someone else in there. The person will go over everything that he or she did. Doesn't matter if you're working exploratory or scripted, you will go over everything that you did, everything that you found. If you have other ideas or doubts, you will go over them there. And then the other person will serve as a devil's advocate, starting to say, hey, did you test this? Did you go over that? And it's incredible how almost every time we find stuff that we didn't think to test before. And I think that it's important also for testers, not only for non-testers. And if every time we find something that we didn't test and we need to go ahead and test it, every third time, fourth time, or fifth time, we'll find a big bug in there because of that debriefing session. So if you're going to be taking anything from this talk, let it be to go to moderntesting.org and read about it. And if you're going to be taking two things, it's going to be to start working with the briefings a little bit more. Okay, so even if we taught people how to test, we need to enable them to test, especially if you're talking about people who are not testers. And the most important parts of enablement that I've found at this point is using testing cookbooks. So I mentioned that we have a testing process, but we realized that if you're going to be testing, for example, the main part of the product, the approach will be different than if you're testing an integration of the product, or if you're testing something that has to do with the APIs of the product. So we used to have one testing cookbook, and a testing cookbook, it's a testing process. We just do it like very, very high level and with steps that you need to cover so people like it. Right now we have about 3 or 4 different cookbooks for different areas of different types of testing in there. It's a Google document with 1 or 1.5 pages of bullets, meaning nothing more than that, but it's important because it gives you structure and you don't need to remember everything by yourself. And you can always continue adding stuff in there. Now, incredibly important, test environments generation. You don't want, especially developers or even people who don't have access to environments, to test on a vanilla environment or to only test in the same environment all the time. So we have realistic environments built on Dockers, and we have a number of those. And it's very easy for me just to call another environment to start working with there. And it has not only data, it also has setups, multiple setups and stuff like that that you can actually use. Another thing is to take testing seriously. And so we generate testing artifacts. Testing artifacts might be test scripts, might be checklists, might be heuristics that you can just take, print out, and work with that. But it shouldn't be, if you don't have enough experience, running exploratory tests might be a little bit dangerous because you're going to be missing stuff. So the whole idea of these artifacts is to help you guide that testing process. And with programmers, we've had pretty good results with checklists and heuristics. We still run sanity scenarios or smoke scenarios every single time something is modified because there's always the risk of regression. Okay, so we still are going to do it, and as much as possible do it automatic, but even if it's not automatic, then do it manually. There's no excuse for not running a 5-minute end-to-end test of your product. Deployment and release process. If you're working DevOps, then you cannot stop at testing only the product because you're also in charge of deploying. And so first of all, you need to understand that every deployment is different. Every deployment will have different risks. For example, are we doing data migration? If we're doing data migration, then there are a couple of things to take into account. First of all, how long does it take to migrate? If it takes more than a couple of seconds, then you will need to schedule that for the weekend because you cannot have downtime if you're working a SaaS product. Maybe more important, if you do data migration and you find the bug, are you able to roll back easily, or do you need to basically get a backup of the database and put it there? So you need to start thinking about that. And based on those points, you need to think about whether you want to do a stage process or milestone definitions. If you want to be running the two baselines of the code in parallel and have a flag where sometimes I can turn it up for some customers, sometimes I can take it down. All of that needs to be taken into account. Don't only plan your rollbacks, test your rollbacks. You don't want to find out when you're in the middle of a rollback and in the middle of a, I don't know, storm happening that, oh, you forgot that you don't have something there. So you need to practice your rollbacks quite often. And again, schedule and make sure that you notify people whenever needed. Okay, so for example, for us, depending on the SLA, if it's over a X amount of minutes that we're going to be down, then we need to do it on the weekend and schedule it ahead of time. So try to think about those points. I cannot put more efforts on the parts of production analytics because, as I mentioned, if you're doing DevOps but you're not measuring what's happening outside, then you might as well not be doing DevOps and just shipping your product to someone else. Because whenever you're doing DevOps, you're going to be having quite a lot of instrumentation. Now, instrumentation, it's not easy, it's not trivial, and it doesn't happen by itself. You need to plan it. There even you need to start by defining, are we going to be building instrumentation or buying instrumentation? There are some pretty neat systems out there that give you quite a lot of not necessarily exception instrumentation, but usability or usage instrumentation. You may want to use an existing product. You may want to build it inside your system. There's some things that you will need to build. If you're going to be checking exceptions, do you have a system like, I don't know, Rollbar or something like that will bring those exceptions and give you more data about it? Again, do you have that feature validation analytics? Did you define them up front? And even if you do you have health dashboards? Are you able to come right now and realistically tell me if we're better off now than we were a week ago or a month ago based on customer health dashboards? So it's important. I mean, you need to understand if you're in a better place or not, because you need always to strive to be in a better place and not to leave that to chance or magic. And for us, it's not only about product health, it's also about strategic customer health. So we might have the whole server product health, but we also have subsets that we want to measure, because maybe different segments or different verticals, we want to make sure that we have specific dashboards as well. Last but not least on my list, before we go over to questions, is again the coordination with external teams. Even on a small organization, if you don't proactively go and ask other people for their feedback, it's not going to happen. Everyone is way too busy for that. So first of all, gather inputs on the needs. If you're going to be making a new feature, publish it on Slack. Hey guys, the product team is going to be working on this feature right now, or say it on your weekly meeting. If you have feedback for that feature, talk to us. And again, make it serious only if you do have feedback. It's not because you just want to know. So try to make sure that you capture that feedback, generate information flows, meaning if we're working on something we're about to deploy, who do I need to inform? Documentation knows that everything is ready. Marketing knows that we need to have a campaign. As I mentioned, if you're releasing an MVP, you need to talk to your customer success to make sure that they're talking to customers that will validate it. Maybe you need to turn a flag on or stuff like that. So it's very important to have information flows. Who do you want to talk to? Well, basically everyone. Starting from program or project management, if you have that function, definitely support, definitely customer success. You don't want to delay a feature because documentation is not ready. It's plain old dumb if that happens to you. And if you need to have professional services involved because the feature is complex at the beginning, make sure that you also bring them up to speed. Okay, so basically everyone who will get value from this. Okay, and these are the places where we are focusing on quality engineering, I like to call it lately, because it's not even quality assurance. We're actually working proactively in order to generate a better process that will result in a better bottom line, because we're working more, let's say, efficiently. I don't want to use the word agile because it's cliche right now, but we're working a lot more efficiently and a lot more effectively than we did before. And again, this is my ongoing mind map on that. By the way, it's Google for that's pretty cool. But you can do your own, and you can do it in a spreadsheet. You can do it on a whiteboard if you want, but I do recommend that you do yourselves. Now, with this in mind, I promised that I would do this, and I don't want to ask you what value you provide today. I want to ask you what value you can provide tomorrow. And when you think about value, try to think about how are you going to be improving the bottom line of your company, and try to think about what decisions can you help make better. How can you really, really change for the better the way that your company is delivering products and measuring them and making sure that you're working the right stuff? And how do you want to modify your position on your objectives and deliverables so that what is going to be different on the stuff that you're doing? Meaning, there are quite a lot of things in your organization that no one is doing. Which ones do you want to take upon yourself to do better? And I think that those are the things that could actually provide quite a lot of value. And the bottom line is that we need to focus more on quality, and the only way of doing that is to focus a lot less on testing and basically passing along testing to others in organization as well. By the way, don't get me wrong, I still do tons of testing, but a lot less because I'm focusing on quite a lot of other things in the organization. So that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. And with that, I'm done. This is me. If you want to send me an email, this is my email. I don't answer fast, but I answer every email that I get. So please feel free. My Twitter handle, I don't use it quite often as I should. My marketing tells me that all the time. And if you want to read about the stuff that I think about and work on, this is my qablog.practice.com. And with that, I'm done. So thank you very much. Sorry for your time. And I'll be happy to answer questions if there are any about these or any other aspects. So,
awesome. Yep. That was a great presentation. Thank you, Joel.
Thanks.
We do have a comment actually. It says, and maybe you can expand on this. It says research and development is methodical. Testing is methodical. Evolution implies random chance and processes. Impossible. And that's the comment.
Well, evolution means random changes that improve the method in a way. Because even if you look into how we went from Waterfall, you know what, let's go from Waterfall to V-model or double model and then from that over to Agile. It was not scattered changes, it was an evolution, meaning, so you had your processes on the Waterfall model and then you realized that, no, you know what, we need to put more thought and changes on improving little by little how we work, and maybe someone already made the change and didn't call it a name, but then they made it part of the process and they came with the V model. And I remember when I started reading, I was working both in Israel and the Silicon Valley when then extreme programming was coming out. And at the beginning, it looked like, okay, so they took what we were doing, they broke it down into pieces and they put it together differently. So they were evolving, changing that method. Now, evolution is random on the changes they do, but it's very process driven on the changes that stick. So yes, we're not going to be doing random changes, we're going to be doing planned changes, but the ones that are going to be sticking are going to be the ones that actually matter. Okay, so in that case, we do have that. So it's not a biological evolution per sense, but it's a change over time where only the things that make sense and add value are going to stick around, and that is where it's very much like evolution. And by the way, I don't see that only in testing and process. I see that in politics. I see that obviously in technology, where everything is built on something else, and all the different processes that we have right now are built on the previous ones. Nothing came out of thin air. So I'm gonna disagree on that, and I'm gonna still think that we are looking at process evolutions in here.
That was a great answer. Thank you. Okay. Next question. Please talk about how you prevent software defects before any testing.
Well, there are a couple of ways. And first of all, it's not economical to prevent all software defects before you get into testing, because you would need to do something like MBT, model-based testing or stuff like that, or even model-based development or stuff like that. But I think that a lot of times bugs come out of misunderstandings. Okay, so if you do a more thorough review of the user story, even by the simple fact that usually one programmer is going to be doing the user story, maybe talking with their manager about it, and they go under single mind, but then they all of a sudden meet another person who's going to be doing the testing, that he or she is looking at it from the customer perspective and even saying, hey, how are we going to be validating that? Maybe talking to someone from marketing on that. And then I come with my questions on, oh, this is what I'm going to be doing, and this is the reason why I'm going to be doing that. Whenever a discrepancy comes into place, oh, wait, I didn't think that we need to add those parameters into the report that we're building, and then you come and say, no, but I talked to Jane and she told me that it's very important because that's what we want to do. Then you already found the bug in there. You're not going to be finding the bug that the system, the JavaScript that you're using doesn't run correctly on Edge. No, those are not the bugs that you're going to be finding. You're going to be finding the bugs that are, I didn't understand the feature in the way that you understood it. Let's try to see who's right and who's wrong. That's mostly what's going to be happening there. Or I'll give you an example. Meaning, I was working on testing a feature that I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to be running this also on Japanese and German, that we have localization. And you saw the guy saying, oh, wait a second. So wait for that, because I haven't added the strings for localization on that feature. So even before I ran my localization test, I found the localization bug because he remembered that he forgot to add that localization strings. Okay, so those are the type of bugs that you're going to be finding, but I'm not naive enough to say that I'm going to be finding all the bugs. I think that it's not that it's impossible, it's just not economically feasible.
Got it, perfect. Next question. How do you help developers understand what a testing mindset is? I find that most devs focus on COD on code and trying to help them understand quality is running up short. Suggestions.
Okay, I last week I did a 7-hour workshop on whole team testing and helping people to do that. And I have my ways, I have my ways, but in a nutshell, and again, it's impossible to explain everything, but I will try to put it simple. First of all, give them the credit to understand what you're telling them. One of the things that I try to explain to developers whenever I'm teaching them to test is that if they are good developers, then they usually get like a very complex user story and they start breaking it down in their heads into simpler things, up until the point that they get to the simplistic feature or function that they need to come and do. Testers will look at it the other way around. We will look into a functionality and we will say, okay, so this is the sunny day scenario. Now let's look on the sides to see how can we make it fall, basically. So that is how I explain it to them. But because I don't expect them to understand it up front, then I also give them a lot of training, meaning I love it when you sit with a developer and you start showing them, okay, so I have the login system. And they say, okay, they entered their username, password, and enter. Say, okay, cool. Now let's start playing around. What happens if I enter the wrong password? What happens if I don't enter a password? You know how many times I have found the bugs that you just don't enter a username, you press enter and you get an exception because it didn't expect to get a null value in that. So that's when you start showing them not only what you do, but how you do it. Now, after a while, they start grasping that, but still then I usually give them heuristics and tables. There's a pretty cool page with a lot of strings and information that Elizabeth Hendricks wrote. I'll be happy to share that with anyone if you just send me an email. So I shared those things with them. Now, having said that, if I think that a feature is extremely complex, I'm not going to be giving it to a developer, and definitely not to a developer without enough experience. Okay, I still know that it's not that they cannot test, but I have more experience testing. And I know that in my team, I have one developer specifically who used to be a tester for 5 years. So he does very good testing whenever he wants to. So you need to be differential in that and try to understand how to do it. But again, trying to understand that saying that a developer cannot grasp the mindset of a tester, it's underestimating your developers. Maybe she or he don't want to do it, but that's another story.
All right, perfect. It looks like Robin has a couple comments, and maybe you can expand. It says, I have been having training classes in my company for developers to focus on improving code quality instead of just test. I've also been training PMs and POs on improving requirement for quality, not just testing. I'm happy to hear that you and I are thinking about the same thing. Quality is bigger than and beyond testing.
For sure. And I think that one of the things that is changing quite a lot, especially as we start working, I only mentioned the cool things about DevOps. And yes, you can measure everything, and yes, you can review everything and you get everything from customers. But it's extremely frustrating that we don't have time to test anymore. So we need to be extremely choosy and picky about what we test. So we cannot rely only on testing anymore to catch stuff. So the more that we work on that, what I'm calling quality engineering, it's going to be better. What I'm starting to realize is that, okay, I'm going to take a step to the side. So my wife works on a security company, startup, whatever, software security company. And she's always telling me that their mantra is that security is everyone's jobs and responsibility. So quality is also everyone's jobs and responsibility, but that doesn't mean that a large company or even an important company, it's not going to have a security officer in charge of making sure that everyone's up to speed with security on how they write code and how they test code. So I think that we're going to be finding ourselves seeing that we're going to be having a quality officer who's going to be in charge of making sure that the process is correct, that everyone is doing their things, and that testing is being done, either pre-production or post-production. And I think that that is like the next level of how we're going to be ensuring quality engineering. because we're going to be having a quality engineering manager or a whatever quality chief quality officer, however you want to call it, whose job is going to be to make sure that everything actually works together. And it's not an ISO officer. I don't like ISO quite a lot, but it's someone who's actually going to be working on the principles very much like the ones in modern testing and the ones that we're going to be coming up next.
Got it. Perfect. And that's all the questions we have time for today. But thank you so much, Joel. I appreciate it. You did a great job, and I really enjoyed your presentation.
Thanks. And again, if anyone wants to drop me a line, go ahead and do it. Catch me on Twitter or just send an email to Joel at PractiTest. And again, I don't answer fast, but I do answer all the emails. And thanks for having me here. Always have to take part.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel.
Okay, bye-bye, everyone. Thank you.
And before we get going, again, our next scheduled webinar will take place on December 9th with Julia Pottinger. She'll be talking about the Agile QA Toolkit, discussing the various tools and concepts she's experienced as a QA consultant. And you can visit softwaretestpro.com to sign up for this webinar and check out the rest of the webinars that we have in store for you for 2020. Just quickly, if you would like to be considered for a webinar, or if you have a great idea for a testing topic, please visit softwaretestpro.com and submit your proposal today. And again, thank you everyone who joined today. Thank you again, Joel, for a great presentation. We hope to see you again soon, hopefully at an in-person conference. So everyone have a great day the rest of your week, and stay safe.
Bye. Thanks, Jane. Talk to you later. Bye.